This incident took place in 2017 when I was 16 years old. I was preparing for board exams and used to take classes for late. Once I got very late and left the class around 10:30 p.m. So there were two routes that lead to my home. One was a long route that takes around 50 minutes to reach the home, and another one was a shortcut but deserted after evening. As I was already late and hungry, I decided to take the shortcut. On that route, I had to cross a railway track and then walk around 2.5 kilometers to reach my home while also crossing a deserted hospital on the way. Weather was pleasant that day, and I was in a good mood when I plugged my earphone on and started walking. Everything was normal until I reached near that hospital. When I reached there, suddenly the wind was cold and I had a goosebumps. It was strange because in our city we always have humidity. However, I kept walking when I felt like someone is walking behind me. I turned around but no one was there. I continued to walk when I saw in some distance there was a woman in white dress that seemed like my neighbor aunt. I was relieved thinking that now I don't have to walk alone on that creepy road. I shouted, calling her name, but there was no response, so I started to walk faster towards her. But however, couldn't get closer to her, so I started to literally run towards her. Still calling her name, and she was still walking in a normal speed, but somehow the distance between us kept unchanged. I couldn't understand what was happening, so I stopped and tried to figure out what the actual thing I was chasing. I kept looking at her, and in a fraction of seconds, she disappeared into thin air. Mind you, that road was all straight for at least 1 kilometer, and there was no place to hide. No way she could run away or hide somewhere. That was enough. I lost control over myself and started running, and only stopped at my home. I was so scared that I got fever that lasted for a week. Next day I told everything to my family, but they didn't believe and shrugged it off, saying I should take some rest from studies and that I am imagining things. But weird things started to happen. I used to feel like someone was caressing my hair when I am sleeping. I was afraid to be in the dark, and I remember seeing silhouette in my room whenever I was alone, but this time I didn't tell these things to my family. But one day my cousin, whom I shared my room with, came running out of the room screaming. We were all in the hall watching TV. When she was asked what happened, she said that after taking shower when she entered the room, she saw me sitting near the window watching outside. She opened the cupboard and was searching for something when she tried to ask me whether I saw what she was searching for. Getting no reply from me, she looked towards the direction on the window and found no one there. I was still in the hall with everyone watching the television. After listening to her, I expressed what I was dealing with for a week. Now the family believed that something was indeed fishy and took me to the holy place. There we met with a person who solved these kind of cases. He blows some verses on me and told my elders to never let me be alone in that house, and strictly told me not to go by that road ever again. He didn't tell me the reason, as he felt I was too young to know that. However, things didn't happen like that again, and we even left that home after 3-4 months. Once upon a time, there was a driver who was driving his new Alto, which he bought from someone. He was coming home from the trip of the reception party alone. There was no one with him in the car, and it made him little uncomfortable. It was raining heavily and the road was deserted. No one was on the road, not even a single vehicle was plying. The airy-looking Savoke forest that night was looking dreadful. He was in a rush as it was very late and he had a trip the next day. He was extremely tensed. His days were not going good as his new car has met with some small accidents which were really costing him. Even the accidents were mysterious and spooky. His car would automatically sometimes steer off the road and sometimes the brakes wouldn't apply. His drivers wouldn't be able to explain the incident, but all the drivers said one thing in common, that his car, Alto, was haunted. They said him that they always felt someone was in the car whenever it was night and when they were all alone. Most of the incidents would happen at night, and they felt that it was something in the car which controlled it at night. He would laugh at their claim and would rebut and rebuff them after listening their claim. But all his drivers would insist on doing prayer in the car, but he never paid any heed to what they said. It was already 1 a.m. when he crossed the temple. Everything was going good when suddenly he saw something really odd on the side of the road. He was shocked and couldn't understand anything. A lady in her mid-50s, naked, holding a plate with her hand, was going towards the temple. He swiftly passed her and didn't have the courage to turn back and look at her. He couldn't understand anything and kept driving. He was horrified. After a little time, when he was able to stable his mind, he thought that the lady must be practicing black magic. She must be a Dayan. The rain was pouring over heavily, and the night looked gloomy. He wanted to reach as fast as he could to his home, as he was extremely scared by the horrific incident. It was exactly 1:15 when he felt something has woken up in the car. Although he couldn't see it, but he could feel it. At first he thought he was feeling like that because of the dreadful incident which occurred just few minutes before, but after he heard a woman's shrill cry from the back seat, he was certain that someone was in the car. He was not able to think and kept driving. He started prayer, but still the horrible cry's sound kept increasing. He finally looked at the front mirror and saw a woman wearing a yellow dress, blood all over her body, was looking at him. He was dreaded and steered the car off the road, eventually running into a tree. He fainted at the spot. The next morning, he found himself in a hospital. He had sustained minor injuries, but the mental scar were permanently carved by the horrific incident last night. He immediately, with his relatives, went to the owner of the haunted car. They reached at his house and apprised him of all what had happened last night. He asked some questions to owner of the car. "Has anything happened in your car? Murder or something?" Owner said, "Are you mad? Are you accusing me of something?" No, last night I saw a lady. She was wearing a blue color." He told him about the details of the woman, how she looked, her age, and everything about her. Owner, "Are you sure what you saw is true?" Yes. Owner was shocked and started crying, and said, "I think you saw my wife. Last year she met with an accident in that car." When I was younger, my family and I went on a road trip to Wyoming to see Yellowstone National Park. It's a beautiful place. So from our home in California, it was about a 16-hour drive. It took us several days worth of on and off driving to get there. And during the nights, we would try to find a little motel to rest at. One of the nights, due to us being behind schedule, my dad attempted to drive through the night to get us there sooner. He made it probably into the wee hours of the night before. He deemed it unsafe and parked us in this little unlit rest stop in the middle of the woods in some flyover state. My brothers and I had fallen asleep in the car several hours before he'd stopped, so for at least a couple hours, we were all sleeping in the car in dark little parking lot surrounded by forest. Having got a couple hours of sleep and being in a pretty uncomfortable position, I woke up in the middle of the night, pretty disoriented but not really scared. I looked around and saw everyone fast asleep in this pitch-black car, and naturally I felt pretty alone. I tried to fall back asleep, but it just was not working out, so I just sat there for a while, boredom setting in. Looking out the window to see where we were, it was pitch black, so I couldn't see anything. Luckily, I wasn't the type to pack light and had brought a couple flashlights in my bag. Being careful not to disturb my sleeping family, I reached into the back seat, unzipped my bag, and pulled out a little plastic flashlight. It wasn't the brightest, but it was enough to see the foreground of the general surroundings. I put it up to the glass, making sure not to make any noise, and pushed the little switch into the on position. I pressed my face against the glass and looked out. At first, it looked like a normal tree line with some bushes, trees, whatever. But as I scanned the darkness, looking for animals, buildings, etc., I noticed this dark shape standing between these two trees in the distance. It looked like the shape of a man, but it wasn't moving, just sitting there. After watching it for a good while and seeing no real signs of movement, I just assumed it was a bush or some kind of natural occurrence. Just as I was about to turn the light off and reattempt sleep, I saw this shadow shape turn 90 degrees and move behind a tree, disappearing from sight. This scared me, and I immediately turned off the flashlight and threw my sweater-turned blanket over my head, shut my eyes tightly, and covered my ears. I was paralyzed with fear and, too full of adrenaline to get any sleep, sat in this semi-fetal position, clutching my flashlight for the rest of the night. I waited until the sun came up and we were back on the road before I got any sleep. I didn't tell anybody about the man I saw in the woods. I'll never forget the terrifying experience I had with my friends Emily and Matt on that fateful road trip. We had been driving for hours, and our GPS led us to a secluded rest stop in the middle of nowhere. The sign creaked in the wind, reading Oakwood Rest Stop in faded letters. As we pulled in, I noticed something odd. The place was deserted, with no other cars or people in sight. The only sound was the creaking of old wooden beams and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Despite my initial hesitation, we decided to take a break, stretching our legs and using the restrooms. The facilities were old and run down, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and a strange smell lingering in the air. As I washed my hands, I noticed strange symbols etched into the mirrors, looking like some sort of twisted graffiti. I pointed them out to Emily and Matt, but they just shrugged it off, saying it was probably just some kids messing around. As we returned to our car, I saw a figure watching us from the shadows. He was tall and gaunt, with sunken eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. I exchanged nervous glances with Emily and Matt, but the figure didn't move or speak. We quickly got back in our car and started the engine, ready to leave. But as we pulled out of the rest stop, I realized we were lost. Our GPS wasn't working, and the roads all looked the same. We drove in circles, the darkness closing in around us. Every time I thought we saw a way out, we ended up back at Oakwood Rest Stop. The figure was always there, watching us, his presence growing more menacing with each passing minute. I started to unravel, my fear and paranoia escalating into arguments with my friends. We knew we had to escape, but the rest stop seemed to have a malevolent force field, trapping us in an endless loop of terror. We tried to call for help, but our phones had no signal. We were completely cut off from the outside world. As the night wore on, we faced unspeakable horrors. We saw ghostly apparitions flitting around the rest stop, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. We heard disembodied voices whispering in our ears, telling us we'd never leave. And we felt an unshakable feeling of being stalked, like something was waiting for us just out of sight. I realized that Oakwood Rest Stop was a place of dark legend, a hub of supernatural activity that preyed on unsuspecting travelers. And we were its next victims. We tried everything to escape. We drove in different directions, but always ended up back at the rest stop. We tried to find a way to communicate with the outside world, but our phones were dead. We even tried to leave on foot, but the woods seemed to shift and twist around us, leading us back to the rest stop every time. As the hours dragged on, our sanity began to fray. Emily became convinced that the figure was a ghost, trapped between worlds. Matt thought it was a serial killer, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And I just knew we had to get out before it was too late. But it was too late. The figure started to move closer, its eyes burning with an evil intensity. We knew we were running out of time. We had to think of something, or we'd be trapped forever in this supernatural hellhole.